Greetings, everyone. My name is Shahidur Rashid, and I'm the Director for South Asia at IPRI. And I'll be your moderator today. We have a fantastic panel lined up for you today. They'll be talking about a topic which is important globally, but I would say is critically important for our region, which is South Asia. And the broad topic is food and agricultural trade in the new policy environment. And the question we are asking today is, how can WTO members support economic recovery and resilience? We'll be asking this question in the context of 7 very contentious issues that are being discussed at the WTO for many years. Our goal here today is to shed some lights on the critical issues that various sub-regions are facing in the run-up to WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference, MC12. So this is part of a series of consultation. We have had one on the 17th of November in French-speaking Africa or Francophone Africa, one on the 23rd of November in Latin America, and another one on the 8th of December, excuse me, in the Anglophone Africa or English-speaking Africa. So for South Asia, I could not possibly have imagined a better group of experts than the one we have today to discuss these issues with a regional perspective. So I'd like to begin by thanking them for taking the time to join us today and with a very brief introduction. So first I would like to introduce, she has not joined yet, hopefully she'll join, Ambassador Gautami Silva. She is the permanent mission. She's the permanent mission of Sri Lanka to the WTO in Geneva. Hopefully she can make it. Next I have is Secretary Aisha Moriani. She is a civil servant heading up the WTO wing within the Ministry of Commerce in Pakistan. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for taking the time and joining us today. Next I have Professor Abhijit Das, head of the Center for WTO Studies, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. He has a distinguished track record of engagement with UNCTAD and WTO. Professor Das, is a real pleasure to have you on today. Thank you for your time. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Fahmida Khatun, the Executive Director of the Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh, CPD in Bangladesh, very widely respected think tank. Dr. Khatun, this is your second time joining an IPRI event this year. So on behalf of IPRI, I'd like to thank you one more time. And finally, we have Mr. Ajay Jakar. He's the chairman of the Bharat Krisak Samaj, India. Mr. Jakar is a very active member of the global development community. He is one of the UN Food Champion and vice chair of one of the action track for 2021 Food System Summit. Very grateful for you taking the time, Mr. Jakar, for this event from your busy schedule. Now to set the stage, let me be specific about 7 WTO issues that I alluded to at the beginning. And the first one that we are dealing with here is domestic support for agriculture. This covers talks on how farm subsidies can be disciplined or rationalized. It has been a very sticky topic for a very long time. Second is a possible permanent solution to the problems some developing countries continue to face when buying food for public stock. This is an important food security question relevant for our region, relevant for all developing countries. Third one is a broad one, is access to market. This is critically important for countries to grow, countries to integrate in the global market. So this will continue to be discussed in the future as well. The fourth topic I have is a special safeguard mechanism for developing countries to address temporary price dispersions or the price volatility or price stabilization policies. We have several policies in place in our region. You are aware of that, the food price stabilization policies, such as minimum support price, if you can remember that in today's context. The fifth one is export competition, including, it's not just the competition, it includes measures seen as things like export subsidies. So sixth one is export restrictions, including the recent proposal to exempt World Food Programme's purchase for humanitarian food aid. So WTO, you know, there's a Nobel laureate this year, have done phenomenal work over time addressing humanitarian crisis. So those issues are on the table as well. The last one is a cotton issue, which is a sticky point for the Western African region, not so much for our region, but for India and Pakistan, it does have implications. Now, in the context of COVID-19 crisis, the importance of these issues have been magnified. So along with other policy and market development, so it gives us an opportunity to revisit the policy frameworks for trade in agriculture. It is also an opportunity to consider what governments can do differently to best support food security, rural livelihood, and environmental sustainability. We'd also like to hear from the participants who have joined remotely today to participate in the conversation during the question and answer session that will follow the presenter's remark. Please submit your questions on ipri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using hashtag AskIPRI on Twitter. That is ASKIFPRI on Twitter. Okay, that is the background. With that, let me move on to the first theme of our discussion today. And the first theme is, of course, COVID-19 and how it has impacted our agri-food markets. And my first question goes to Dr. Fahmida Khatun. Here is the question for you, Fahmida. We all know COVID has disrupted global agri-food markets. It has disrupted particularly the perishable commodity market in our region. So what implication do you think these disruptions have for South Asia broadly? But you can certainly bring your own perspective based on your own research in Bangladesh. Over to you, Fahmida.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this August gathering and to speak on a subject which is very important for Bangladesh and also for South Asian countries. As you have just mentioned during your preface, that the importance of agricultural negotiation in the context of World Trade Organization is so important, and particularly when you talk about reviving the economy and also addressing the needs of the vulnerable people. In South Asian countries in general, even before the COVID-19, a large number of people were in fact below the poverty line, and then who have limited income and who have also limited nutritional access. So COVID-19 is going to decrease their food availability even more. In this respect, I would like to specifically make a few recommendations. First one is that, as we have seen that South Asian countries in general have been going through a structural transformation whereby we have seen the contribution of agriculture sector in the economy has declined. However, a large number of people are employed in the agriculture sector, and also agriculture sector is the crucial sector for ensuring food security. Now, with COVID-19 situation, we have seen that South Asian countries had managed quite well, I would say, particularly in the context of Bangladesh. We have seen bumper production even during COVID-19 situation. However, if such situation, that crisis like COVID exists for a longer period, then there is a problem, because as I have mentioned that the agriculture sector's contribution has shrunk, and also in many countries we have not seen much innovation. So first one is that the agriculture sector needs more investment. So even though this is the life and livelihoods for many, but we have not seen much investment in this, in the agriculture sector. In general, there is a dearth of public expenditure in all the sectors. infrastructure also. However, agriculture is gradually getting less and less investment. So this brings me to the second point, which is also related to investment, is the use of technology and innovation. There also investment is very, very important, because South Asian countries are also vulnerable to a lot of shocks, including the impact of climate change. So in order to prepare for the climate change, the impact of climate change, and also for water resistant food agriculture, or rice varieties and all agriculture productions, technological innovation is very, very important. But we have seen, I can say, in the context of Bangladesh, there is always a lack of resource or dearth of resources in case of R&D. So that is crucial. And then also the third issue, again related to finance and all, is that access to finance by the farmers themselves, because of the nature of the production system or the agriculture itself, a large number of farmers, they have limited finance. So though in our country there is support from the government in terms of subsidies or incentives, but however, access to those incentives are also not equal across the board. In many cases, the smaller ones do not have equal access. However, they are the ones who are going to be affected. So this is again very, very important. Finally, I would say that in case of food policy itself, when you talk about food policies within the country, then we need to specifically remember probably at least 4 groups of people. One would, of course, those who are below poverty, who are vulnerable to various price shocks, and also those who are below extreme poverty. And by the way, during COVID-19, there are more poor people, and a set of new poor has added to these already existing poor people. So those are the people who need to be kept in mind. And then the urban poor, and also the women particularly, because we have seen that in terms of nutritional status, women are the ones who are mostly deprived, particularly during crisis. So I would say that, when regarding the balancing of these, of the various economic actors within the agriculture sector, for example, the producers, the consumers, and many others in the whole value chain, there is always a struggle by governments, particularly those who have limited resources. Because one is that the producers have to be given adequate incentives, and also given the prices, the fair prices, so that they are incentivized, they can produce more. But on the other hand, the governments also have to make the food available to the consumers, so that they can have access to the food and other agriculture commodities at an affordable price. So making a fine balance has always been a challenge. However, there are a number of established policies. One is, of course, the procurement of the produces by the governments at an affordable price, at a price which is good for, or incentivized price for the agricultural farmers. That's one thing. And also in terms of consumers, there again, one basic or overarching issue is that improvement of income and improvement of opportunities, so that people have income or money in their hand to buy food. Because we have seen that food self-sufficiency does not itself bring food security. So there are many countries in the world, but not that everyone gets access to that food. So in order to have an equitable access to food, income opportunities, employment opportunities, these are the issues which are very important. So that brings us to the overall macro policies, actually. So when we are just undergoing this crisis, many governments, all the governments in the world have undertaken measures which are basically the fiscal measures. That means that, public expenditure have to be increased, and also people have to be given resources, direct cash transfer to the poor people, so that they have income in their hands, they can spend that, and they can, protect themselves, they can stay afloat. So this, at this
Dr.
point in
Patwari.
time, fiscal measures is very important. I think I would stop in the interest of time.
Thank you.
My time is up. So in the next session, probably I'll add.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very insightful thoughts, very specific focus areas for intervention, very helpful, but we need to come back to the core question about the disruption in the food value chain, how that has impacted our consumers and producers. Hopefully you can do that in a second round. Okay, so next question I have is for Mr. Jakar. Mr. Jakar, you lead one of the largest farmers organization, and you are also a farmer yourself. You do citrus farming, I understand. So I would like your India-specific insights in my next question, or you could call it thoughts. And here it is. We all know Indian agriculture has shown remarkable resilience to the pandemic. While overall Indian economy contracted, agriculture sector is expected to grow over 3%. So my question to you is this: how did Indian farmers do it? Not only in terms of production, but also in terms of marketing amid an unprecedented pandemics. Over to you, Mr. Jakar.
Thank you for this opportunity that you have me here, giving my opinion. I would want to say that when the let's begin when the lockdown happened. When the lockdown happened, everything was closed, and it impacted the producers adversely everywhere. For example, the price of eggs went down from 4 rupees 50 paisa to 1 rupee 50 paisa. The price of milk went down from 35 to 26 per liter. The maize, which was selling at over 2,000 rupees per quintal, went down to 1,300. Also, what happened is the pandemic, after the lockdown, people were allowed to go back from cities. Lots of migration happened for the first time, I think so, in the history of mankind. People were leaving urban areas and going back to rural areas. It might have happened 2,000 years ago, of which I don't know, but in the recent history, this is the first time it happened. It led to a very peculiar situation where lots of migrant labor were coming back to the villages, and in states like UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, and maybe 50% of India, or maybe 70% of India, the wages went down for agriculture labor. So they went down from something like 200 to 250 rupees per day to something like 150 rupees per day. And on the other side, when paddy sowing season was beginning in Punjab, the price went up from 3,000 rupees per acre to something like 5,000 to 6,000 rupees per acre for sowing of paddy. So this is how things got impacted. But this was in the initial months. What we see as a longer term consequence of the pandemic on producers is that they are economically stressed as the rest of the population, and they have taken on debt also, which they have not been able to repay back. The repayment cycle has stopped. And consequently, as the whole population of the country is going under economic stress, as has been very clearly articulated by Government of India data itself, that the economy was depressed for so many months. It is recovering now slowly, that people have less money to spend, and they're spending less on fruits and vegetables, they're spending equal amount on food, but on nutrition, on good food, they're spending less. And those who have the money, though that section of the society which has the money is spending less because they're uncertain of their future. So the demand for fruits and vegetables has gone down substantially. And even though supply lines have come back on, there is not much to supply that much. So things have gone down. And if you will see within the few months of the pandemic where supply got hit, it would have normally, I'm not a student of economics, but they tell you that if supply gets hit, there would be huge inflation. So even if the supply got hit, there was no inflation because people were not eating much. They were eating less. So that's another problem. And my time is going to be up, so I'll just take 2 more minutes. I mean, not even 30 seconds. A huge demand for farmers' produce comes from marriage ceremonies, from parties, from restaurants. Now that supply has got absolutely devastated, and there is no demand for that. And that leads to suppression of farm gate prices for farmers. I, being a citrus farmer, can very clearly tell you that my citrus got harvested before the pandemic. So I did not suffer as much consequently for my citrus. But now, because of less marriage season, less requirement of juice for which my citrus is used normally for, or as a tabletop variety, the prices are suppressed by at least 20 to 30% because of people having less money to spend. And last point is that people, when they were living in the cities, I mean, all rural people have some member of the family who's working in the city or working off the farm, which supports the farm income of the family, of the part of the family staying in the village. Those remittances have come to an end, and that has also created a big situation, big adverse impact on livelihoods of people living in the villages. This remittances coming to an end. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll maybe come back in the next session. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. Our moderator appears to have had some technical issues. And so at this point, we will move on to the next discussion. The next question, Ambassador Silver, I'd like to ask to you is, how have tensions between, well, the topic that we want to discuss is, is Dr. Vikar. Is how have tensions between major economies affected countries in the region, and what might these mean for trade in food and agriculture? That's a general area where we want to head. But Ambassador, to you is, have recent trade tensions affected economies in South Asia? If so, which products and producers have been most affected and how?
First, let me thank wholeheartedly for the organizers, particularly Jonathan and the entire team, for having invited me to present my views, Sri Lanka's views, and on this very important topic of trade tensions. It's not new to WTO. The studies and empirical data on trade and trade diversion effects of the United States, mainly on China, show that the trade tensions have resulted in a sharp decline in bilateral trade, higher prices for consumers, and trade diversion effects due to the increased imports from countries not directly involved in trade wars. That's where the South Asia comes in. By analyzing recently released trade statistics, the study finds that consumers in the US are bearing the heaviest brunt of the US tariffs on China, as their associated costs have largely been passed down to them and importing firms in the form of higher prices. The studies also find that Chinese firms have recently started absorbing part of the cost of the tariffs by reducing the price of their exports. The results of such studies serve as global warnings. Loose trade war is not only harming the main contenders, it also compromises the stability of the global economy and future growth, including South Asia. It would be more logical to assume that the US tariffs on China have made other players, including countries in South Asia, more competitive in the US market and led to a trade diversion effect. Out of 35 billion US dollars Chinese export loses in the US market, about around 21 billion, approximately 63%, was diverted to other countries, while the remainder of 14 billion was either lost or captured by US producers. In developing Asia, the effects from the trade conflict had been mildly positive, as the region benefited from trade redirection in electronics and textiles. According to the empirical data, US tariffs on China resulted in Chinese Taipei particularly gaining 4.2 billion in additional exports to the US in the first half of 2019 by selling more office machinery and communication equipment. Next is Vietnam. Exports to the US swelled by 2.6 billion, driven by trade in communication equipment and furniture. Trade diversion also benefits South Korea, Canada, and India, were smaller, but still substantial, ranging from 0.9 billion US dollars to 1.5 billion US dollars. In addition, Latin America, of course, Mexico recorded somewhat a modest increase, mostly in agri-food, transport equipment, and electronic machinery sectors. The remainder of the benefits were largely to the advantage of other South Asian countries, such as Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Pakistan in South Asia. This indicates that except India and Pakistan, other countries in South Asia have not significantly been benefited from the trade tensions. Similarly, trade tension effects favoring African region has been quite minimal. Now, effects on the sectors. I think that is one of the things that I have been asked to comment on. As I mentioned before, mainly office machinery parts, electrical machinery, chemicals, communication equipment, metals and ore, precision equipment, and agri-food products. Textile and apparel are the sectors in the highest order of diversion effects. Now, when you look at the trade diversion from China to other countries, particularly in the agri-food sector, the estimated trade diversion is 100%. Economies in developing Asia has seen exports rising, reflecting trade redirection in these sectors, mainly the two main sectors, electrical and textile and clothing. Though this list indicates the most hard hit sectors, but trade diversion effects in these sectors have been varied, as some effects were well below average, possibly because the lack of supply capacity outside China. So though there was encouragement for trade diversions, the countries couldn't really grab that opportunity because they lacked the supply sources. Finally, the caveat is that when you're talking of this trade redirection effect, it will take longer and the lengthier and more complex the global value chains are, and the ensuring interruption to production could be more proactive. There may be secondary disruption effects from the possibility of production activities that took advantage of low-cost labor in Asia and returned to US due to the tariffs will become highly automated in the US, and increased negative employment effects automated in the US, and increased negative employment effects further. The situation also may lead up to the US authorities becoming more vigilant on transshipments coming from other countries in the region, due to the possible circumventing practices likely to be practiced by the exporters in China to circumvent these high tariffs. The ultimate possible setbacks for countries in South Asia would take the form of them being subject to unnecessary anti-circumventing investigations to be initiated by the US authorities. So I think I'll stop at this point, maybe due to the time constraints. So certainly these are some of the sectors and the countries who have either benefited in a modest way or big way and in minimal way. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're muted. Shahid, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you.
Shahid,
Thank you.
you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your insights. I was able to listen to you. Sorry, I got a power cut for some reason. Unusual, but it has happened today. So let me move on to the next question, which is for Professor Abhijit Das, which is to what extent can the region's policies on trade and markets contribute to the progress of food security and environmental sustainability? So, sorry, I lost the question for you. Give me just a moment to organize my notes here. Okay, I'll ask the next question to Mr. Jacker. I'm sorry. I know you're the co-chair of the Action Track 2 on the UN Food System Summit 2021. And Action Track 2 is responsible consumption, which has direct links to having sustainable food system and environment. So I was wondering if you could reflect on what governments in our region could do differently to help develop a healthy and environmentally sustainable food system for the next generation. Floor is yours, Mr. Jacker.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
I would want to say there's a book, Radical Uncertainty, written by John Kay and Mariel King, where they write that effective leaders understand that they have superior responsibility rather than superior wisdom. I think so. Leaders in South Asia and in Africa, right? Why South Asia and Africa? I think so. Even in England and USA, and I think so everywhere, they need to realize that they're not endowed with superior wisdom. They need to understand. They need to talk to stakeholders. They need to understand. We also find in much of the world, including in our part of the continent, that bureaucracy and the government are so fixated on outcomes and they don't work on the processes, and which results in failure to meet objectives of a policy. And that is why, Dr. Rashid, you will see that especially in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and maybe I have less experience of other places, you will find constantly this narrative comes in is that it's an implementation failure. I as a farmer on the ground feel this is absolutely wrong. I think policies fail to get implemented properly because they are not reflective of ground realities. They're made by people sitting in air-conditioned offices, and as a farmer, this is a point of what we can do better. So the first thing we need to do is we need to improve the quality of governance for delivery to happen, and that means you have to start talking to stakeholders, need to spend more time designing processes than investing. I think more important than investing resources is to design the process to decide where to invest that money. Just giving more money for public infrastructure is not going to work. I'll take, maybe I have a minute and a half to go. And I would also want to talk and put this point very much across is that if you look at the number of chronic hungry people in the world, if you look at the people who are undernutrition, is rising every year. And you will see that those who produce the food are undernutrition, and those who buy the food are obese, the consumers are obese. So obviously the food systems have failed us. And that is exactly why the UN Food Systems Summit is being held in September of 2021. This is exactly what it is about. And that's where we come in and we try and prepare a documentation that the countries will be free to adopt should they feel about it, because the document is not a negotiated document that's going to come from member states of the UN. It's also important to look at what could be the cause of it. What are farmers thinking is the cause of this undernutrition on the farms? I mean, it's an irony. Those who produce food are the ones who are more and more dependent on markets for food. So two things have been constant about why this problem, why farmers are feeling this problem is there. One is that since WTO itself was formed, people feel that the majority of farmers have suffered because of it. And when I say majority, I mean, I'm not talking about political boundaries. WTO is not a food systems approach. WTO, the time I think so is up. It was a silos approach. We're looking at a systems approach about how climate change mitigation can happen. So if you look at a worldwide food systems approach, this needs a rethink. It's not a sacrosanct policy when we realize that majority of the world farmers are suffering because of it. We need to think, country states need to come back to the table and decide how it must be done. It's leading to the largest migration in human history. People are leaving rural areas for urban areas because agriculture is not sustainable. It drives down farm gate prices for food importing countries. So it's a much bigger thing. So I would just want to leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Jakhar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very insightful discussion, but I would like to push back a little bit because all the trade policies can impact regionally. So if you say the WTO policies are silos, I would have disagreement with that. But anyway, that's why we have this roundtable and conversation. Let me come back to another issue, which is globally. I'll come back to you if we have time. Globally, very popular topic right now, and you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the trade tension, trade policy tension about the major economies of the world. In case in point is the US and China. So that issue has implications for the developing countries as well. So my question goes to Professor Abhijit Das, who has been actually a policymaker, Indian civil servant, has worked for the WTO as well as worked for the UNCTAD, a lot of experiences. Could you reflect on how this kind of bilateral trade tension having impact in our region, South Asia generally, and to India in particular? Thank you. Floor is yours, Professor Das.
Thank you, Dr. Shahid. At the outset, I'm grateful to the organizers for inviting me to share my views. As Ambassador Gautami very rightly mentioned, that the trade tensions between US and China really did not lead to any trade diversion which could be said to have favored the South Asian countries. When it comes to food and agriculture, perhaps the trade diversion, if at all benefited any country, that was Mexico. South Asian countries really did not benefit from it. In terms of specific implications of the trade tensions, let me mention 3 or 4. One consequence of the trade tension is that the United States government decided to grant tens of billions of dollars of subsidies to its farmers. Now, that does pose a problem for agriculture in South Asia. What happens if some of these agriculture products, which are highly subsidized, enter our markets? That definitely could pose a threat to livelihoods of millions of farmers in South Asia. Then the second consequence has been of this trade tension that US and China have imposed retaliatory tariffs, counter tariffs against each other, many of which is very questionable in terms of legality at the WTO. In short, the respect for WTO rules has declined, and that is getting manifested in a number of ways. Another implication of the rising trade tensions between these two major countries is the fact that we are seeing new narratives emerging at the WTO. One of the new narratives which has emerged is that developing countries really should not be entitled for special and differential treatment. Now, this really is alarming. When we look very carefully at the agreement on agriculture at the WTO, that's an agreement which is highly asymmetric, which is highly imbalanced in favor of the developed countries. And I would stick my neck out and say that this is an agreement which has reverse special and differential treatment provisions. Special and differential treatment provisions in favor of the developed countries. Now, the narrative that is sought to be built is that developing countries must not have access to special and differential treatment in general, whereas the developed countries can continue to have their inverse SNDT in the agreement on agriculture. That definitely poses huge challenges for the agriculture sector in the South Asian countries. Another narrative which has emerged is that it is really the developing countries which are distorting the global agriculture markets by providing subsidies. Now, this is again a highly problematic, highly difficult narrative to accept. And if we look at some of the proposals that have been made by some of the WTO members, The implications of those proposals really are that if we look at a time horizon of, let's say, 1 decade down the line, some of the proposals would require developing countries such as India to make huge cuts in their farm support, whereas the developed world really would not make any meaningful cuts. On the contrary, one of the proposals actually will result in the United States having a flexibility to enhance its farm support. So under this, as a consequence partly of the trade tensions, the attention is slowly getting diverted from getting the developed countries to cut their farm support, and instead, the developing countries are being painted as being villain of the piece, and they will be asked to take commitments that will really tie the hands of their governments to provide whatever minuscule support they can provide, given the fact that they don't have very deep pockets. In particular, the flexibility of these countries to provide input subsidies to their farmers, that is under threat. So I'm going to stop at that and maybe come back to this later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. This is very passionate, powerful arguments. But again, for us, questions remain, right? I mean, we have been talking about these developing country subsidies for decades. It hasn't happened. So our question was, in the context of this trade tension, was there something for us to be more forceful in making these arguments? So that will continue to remain, I think, in the future. Let me go back now, come back to Dr. Fahmida Khatun on the issue related to the very delicate balance that we are talking about. You have seen in the media about farmers' protest in India. This is the balancing act of dealing with the interest of the consumers and producers, and of course, all value chain actors in between. What kind of policies can our region do so that this is also in line with what Mr. Jacker has pointed out? What can we do? What kind of policy levers do we have to make that balance, have balanced policies that can benefit farmers, at the same time producers, and at the end, we can develop a sustainable food system? Fahmida, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As I have mentioned in my first segment, that the agriculture sector's investment has been quite low compared to other sectors, and this is a sector where government has to come forward. What we have seen, the structure of the agriculture, particularly in Bangladesh, is that the fragmentation is quite large. I mean, those who are into production, the scale, the size of farm sizes are low, which is a real problem in terms of scaling up. This is one. And then also the larger farmers who are not necessarily farmers on the ground, but they control the whole farming system and agriculture to a large extent. So the benefits which are given are mostly enjoyed by them. So in order to get benefited from the whole value chain of this agriculture, there are a number of areas where the farmers can be supported by government, because in this respect, I would also like to mention that when you talk about agriculture, it is not only crops but also other agriculture. For example, the fisheries. During this COVID-19, we have seen that the fish farmers have also been hit hard. Again, the fish, many of the fish farming also are controlled by the large ones, but the smaller ones are affected, and particularly the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises within the whole farming system, fish farming system particularly, they had been without financial support, and the fiscal stimulus which has been announced by the government, which is quite substantive for a least developed country, I would say, which is about 4% of the GDP, that has not also has been targeted to many sectors within the agriculture. fish farmers is one of the sectors, though there are some allocation. So I would say that, you know, one of the other issues I would say is that the direct financial support, fiscal support is one important area, and also the, you know, the when you talk about the balancing, the purchasing power of people is important, because if you produce, the farmers are producing, but who will purchase? If there is no market, then, you know, many, we have in our country also, we have in many instances we have seen that, you know, the milk producers are throwing the milk on the roads, or, you know, potato producers, they are also, you know, throwing the potatoes. This brings to the issue of investment in areas, for example, the storage capacity, which is also a requirement for the, you know, farmers. Many of those who cannot particularly afford to have a cold storage support from the government is needed. And also the, you know, the other issue is that those who are, particularly many women are also involved in the agriculture sector, they have been more affected than others. So when you talk about the whole food value chain, looking at the smaller ones are important, and those who are vulnerable, that's also important. In this respect, if I also may, you know, broaden the horizon, that, you know, if we are governed by international trade policies, then there is a problem. My previous speaker very eloquently touched upon those. I would also like to touch upon a few of these, or maybe just specific one particular issue, the subsidy discipline issue, disciplining in the context of WTO. Particularly, there's a big discussion on fisheries subsidies. You know, large countries or developed countries are providing subsidies, fish subsidies. There's you know, no, we don't see any ray of hope in terms of wrapping up the subsidies, fisheries subsidies. But on the other hand, countries like Bangladesh, they are asked to reduce subsidies. But fisheries subsidies is very important, particularly for the small scale fisheries. That's the source of livelihoods for many large, many farmers, many small farmers. And also this is a source of nutrition. So I think the, you know, coherence within the global trading system, multilateral trading system, that also very important. I think my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Coming back to the increasing public investment in agriculture, R&D, infrastructure, these are really, really good points. But I was also thinking that regional trade per se could do a lot of good to the people of our region. So South Asia intra-regional trade is so low compared to, even South Asia does more trade with Eastern Asia or ASEAN countries than does among ourselves. Maybe there are rooms there as well as a policy lever moving forward. But thank you so much. Hopefully I will have time to come back. I understand that Madam Secretary Moriani is not with us. So what I'll do, I'll pose a question, the next question that I have to Mr. Jakar. And that question is, how best the governments of our region support farmers to enhance competitiveness of the agricultural sector, taking into consideration the particular challenges that smallholders face in the region. Mr. Jakar?
Thank you for that, Dr. Shi. Before I answer that, I just want to quickly come back on trade within our physical areas here. My farm is on the border with Pakistan in Punjab. And we are closer to Kabul and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan than we are to Cochin, or you could say Madras. And if relationships improved, a lot of diversification in Punjab could happen, because we face bad relations with our neighbors, and that's why we are denied access to Central Asian markets for our produce. So I think because this is one of the discussions today was of international relations, how it impacts trade. So I think if relations were to improve, Punjab could diversify away from paddy and wheat, and we would have very good markets available for our produce in Central Asia, in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And as someone from Punjab, I think that's very important. But other than that, I think coming back to what the government can do is, I think we need to relook at the whole system of subsidies that are being provided to farmers. There could be input subsidies, there could be output subsidies. We need to relook at them and holistically redesign the whole agriculture food policy space. And I think that cannot be done by the government on its own. It cannot be done by the universities. And the last point I would say is that the government needs to focus first on human resources and basic research, and then come to infrastructure. We normally have a tendency to prioritize infrastructure, brick and mortar. I, as a farmer, think we need to flip that model around now, and we need to focus on human resources and basic research. This is what we should be focusing on if you want to plan for a longer term issues of India's food security and nutrition security. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Jakar. This is very relevant for our region in terms of this is also related to the point that Dr. Khatun made about enhancing investment in agriculture. Well, I think India spends about 1% of the GDP in agriculture, R&D. So unless we change that, I think we'll have problem educating, having the technological know-how and the human capacity to move the agriculture forward in the context of the smallholder farming. So thank you very much for those points. I would now like to come to Professor Das again. That is actually in the context of the regional trade. I would like to take that point with you as well. What do you think? Why you have been working on WTO? WTO couldn't do anything increasing the intra-regional trade. Now we are talking about a pandemic of the unprecedented size, and we are falling behind with SDG targets, and we are falling behind with targets on climate change and a number of other things. So what can we do in here as a region so that you have a powerful voice at the WTO to make a difference for this reality? Over to you, Professor Das.
Thank you, Dr. Rashid. Regional trade certainly is an important instrument of fostering development, but let me also hasten to add that this should not be meant to imply that countries in South Asia should proactively seek out and negotiate free trade agreements in the major markets. That would be fraught with huge risks. And in the context of agriculture, let me just mention that free trade agreements do not end up addressing issues of subsidies. On the other hand, tariffs would might come down to zero. So countries in South Asia would really not have any policy instrument left to protect their farm sector from cheap imports from their FTA partners, particularly the developed countries who give huge subsidies to their farm sector. So that's the first point we need to bear in mind. What can we do collectively? Collectively, I think the South Asian countries on many of the agriculture issues have joined hands, and they do have a bit of a common voice. One area where they've had a common voice is the need to restore the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO to its original status. That is a two-stage dispute settlement mechanism, something that has withered away with on account of certain actions by the United States, which has resulted in a rule-based system getting replaced by a power-based system. That doesn't bode well for us countries in South Asia. So we do need to strive hard to see that the dispute settlement system gets back on its feet, the appellate body gets back on its feet. That is number one. Number two, on many of the issues of real interest to countries in South Asia and agriculture, number one was getting the developed countries to reduce their farm support. There is a proposal jointly by India and China on the table, which seeks to curtail the flexibilities of developed countries in respect of water what's popularly called the amber box subsidies. That could go a long way in protecting the agriculture sector in South Asian countries. Then there are certain issues for which there is a negotiating mandate to go ahead, but we really have not seen much progress. Mr. Chairman, you alluded to those two issues in your opening remarks, namely the need to address and successfully conclude the negotiations on a permanent solution for the public stockholding issue. That's an issue of huge interest, not only to South Asian countries, but I would say at least a dozen or even 20 odd developing countries across the world who really are at the risk of their food security programs being held illegal at the WTO. Then the other issue is of developing countries, particularly those in South Asia, acquiring a legal right to impose additional tariffs going beyond their existing WTO entitlements. Whenever there's a surge in imports or low-priced imports come into their country, they could invoke what is called a special safeguard duty. Let's bear in mind that the developed countries have acquired, or they arrogated to themselves this right at the end of the Uruguay round. Most of the developing countries do not have this right. During the Doha round, the developing countries as a group called G33 were at the forefront in trying to acquire this right. We did see some progress in that direction, but those negotiations could not be concluded. So there I do find a need for developing countries, particularly in South Asia, to see if they can join hands.
Thank you, Professor Das. Thank you so much. We are
Right.
actually, I'm just being cognizant of time. We are running a bit late, but the discussion is very, very exciting discussion that we are having here. I need to come back to Madam Ambassador Silva. I have actually two questions. One, first, I would like to get your thoughts on why SAFTA or BIMSTEC, all these regional bodies have not been so successful in raising their voice and making a change within the WTO context, in the WTO discussion. That is one. My main question for you, Madam Ambassador, is that how can WTO members ensure that MC12, meaning Ministerial Conference 12 season, contribute towards meaningful progress on food security and rural development in South Asia? With this, I think after Madam Ambassador's response, we'll go to Q&A. So please keep sending your questions online or hashtag Twitter, IPRI.org, any way you can. Thank you. Madam Ambassador,
I am sorry to interrupt, but I will also would like to let you know that Aisha Moraine, it is on the call. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Am I to proceed now? Yes.
Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you for the questions, very valuable questions. And first on the BIMSTEC and SAFTA, why they are lagging behind. I think when we, as a negotiator who had negotiated these agreements in the past from Sri Lanka side, what I noted is that there are political dimensions as well, which are hindering, progress. But in addition to that, I think we are quite producers of the same products, and then everyone is having, when you look at the outcome of these negotiations, we are having huge negative lists, which are not open for trading among the member states. And basically, the agriculture sector is very closely protected by everyone. And so when you are competitive, when you have competitive edge over some of the products, when they are not traded among the trading partners, that actually itself is a handicap for the improvement of trade among them. And the issue is that when they resort to such measures, and also Professor Das said, sometimes the cheap imports are coming from these countries, so they have to really have mechanisms to protect them. Now, we do not have, I don't know where under SAFTA and CEFTA, there are bilateral or regional safeguard mechanisms that are inbuilt. but still if you are invoking them, they are governed by certain WTO rules. I think when we negotiated one or rather when we were framing something with the BIMSTEC, so I think we very much align those provisions in line with the WTO provisions, where you have to carry out an investigation and there has to be a petition. So like that, I think there again, so therefore they are not willing to open up those sectors even when they have safeguard mechanism in place. Now coming to the other question in the WTO, how do we ensure our food security concerns are addressed in the run-up to the MC12? I think Professor Das set a very good background for me to intervene. There, I think he talked of the agriculture negotiations. Where do we stand right now, and what are the issues that are very dear to us? The PSH, the public stock holding, and that is, I think, one of the issues that we got some mandate under the Bali ministerial declaration. But I think recently India also advocated, because India had tried to use that mechanism and then to see whether that mechanism is actually practicable, feasible. I think India ran into a lot of difficulties, and that is now being questioned. Yesterday, when at the General Council, the European Commission is questioning the notification which India had made under PSH mechanism. Now coming to the special safeguard mechanism, and it is again, I think Professor Das injected the very appealing reason as to why most of the developing countries require this, because they were not they did not have the ability to invoke that in terms of import surges because unilaterally, because they had to adhere to the WTO rules. So now SSM, the special safeguard mechanism, PSH, they are the most important aspects which would decide the outcome of a MC12. So if they are not getting meaningful results under that, then it is a recipe for another failure. Now coming to the domestic support again. Now we are very quite disturbed. Now when the mandate is actually to address the trade distorting subsidies, the proponents, particularly the Keynes group and others, are trying to even include Article 6.2 agriculture subsidies that are only available to the developing countries, and considering that is also a distortive aspect, and aiming to include that also in the calculation of overall commitments, and then address the cuts, apply the cuts to make further reductions. So like
Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
We'll have to undertake negotiate obligations if this proposal is going to be
very sorry to cut you. This is
right.
Really exciting conversation. Dear all audience, I think we are lucky to have Secretary Moriani back with us. We are running quite a bit late, but I see that conversation is so exciting, we can continue. So I thank you, Madam Secretary, for joining us today. We are out of time. We have Q&A session right now, but I'd like one question for you to share your insights on, which is related to, we know this, our region, probably in terms of the disruption of livelihood, COVID has caused the biggest disruption in human history, affecting 1.7 million people. So we'll be falling behind with all the SDG targets. What can, as a region, we do so that we have a voice at WTO? Can WTO members do anything to catch up? So I'll leave that question to you, and thank you for joining us even though late. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I was here from the very beginning and was waiting for my turn. Somehow I think you missed the chance, and I'm not the secretary. I'm joint secretary here in the Ministry of Commerce, and I'm speaking as in my personal capacity. I just want to clarify this. Yes, SDGs are very important, and food security is part of the SDGs. And in the WTO, what members can do is that, first of all, they must ensure that the inherent mandate of continuing the agriculture negotiations under Article 20 continues. they work on it and develop effective multilateral discipline on domestic subsidies so that small farmers across the world do not suffer and their production is not displaced from the international markets. Countries can increase expenditure on research and development so that more and more drought-resistant varieties are available to farmers, and integrate with the CGIAR system of global research so that there is greater cooperation on issues such as climate change, and strengthen the markets. I think it is very important because of COVID, we do see disruption in the supply chains and markets. So we make a conscious effort at forum like WTO to ensure that markets remain stable and we cooperate with each other. Because if domestic and international markets are strengthened, farmers will get better prices. And to make agriculture profitable and so there is nothing more important than getting a good price of your produce. So I would say that it is one of the primary responsibilities of the government and as countries in the WTO forum to ensure that we uphold markets for the benefit of poor farmers and ensure fair trade for them, and ensure also their participation in the value chains by providing them, storage facilities. And many participants have highlighted very important aspects of trade as well as participation in the domestic markets as well as in the international and regional markets. So I think we need to have interventions prepared at various levels. And now smart agriculture is being talked about. Number of mobile subscribers has increased all over the world. So telecom is being used even in poor developing countries for the benefit of farmers. So I think it's very important that we adopt technology and make sure that this technological growth also works for the benefit of our farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm not sure how I missed it, but apologies for not seeing the note earlier. So let's go back to the question and answer session. It has been a very, very exciting conversation that we have had. It was really insightful. I have benefited quite a lot. So I'll go to the question and answer now. What we'll try to do, we are running about roughly 15, 20 minutes late. So my first question will be for Aisha Muriani from the Ministry of Commerce in Pakistan. This is about, you touched on the technology part of it, but the smallholders don't yet have the access to technology to be effective in terms of the dissemination of the extension information. What can region do as a whole or country specifically to address that challenge so that technologies can be disseminated more effectively so that they become more competitive in the global markets?
Yes, I think public policy can play a very important role here. I would say investment on infrastructure, IT infrastructure is very important, and access to internet across country in remote areas can play a very effective role in ensuring that the benefit of technology reaches to the small farmers. And I think it's not something which is not possible, because even a country like Pakistan, we have 70 to 80 million mobile subscribers, and the use of 3G is becoming very popular, even 4G. So mobile phone is something which has become a development tool now. Access to mobile phone is no longer a luxury, I would say. By ensuring easy access to this technology, we can ensure that farmers get information about the prices timely. They get information about the inputs that they have to use for their production. And the similar, a lot of facilities are being organized now through online services. So I think a lot of opportunity is there, and business development services to connect farmers with all these new technological services can play a very important role in terms of ensuring connectivity. So we are trying our best to disseminate this information, not only to the farmers, but to the business development services providers as well, that this new form of service which the farmer community needs can bring win-win solutions, not only for the service providers, but for the farmers as well. So I think ensuring access to technology was a challenge a few years ago, but I think the tools are available now, and public policy can play a huge role in terms of ensuring this access.
Thank you so much. Very, very insightful. I would pose a similar question to Mr. Ajay Veer Jakar. That actually, I'll give a little twist to it, and that twist is there a room for public-private partnership in this, in disseminating the right kind of information to the smallholder agriculture, not only for extension information, for the market information, integrating with global markets? What is your experience in Indian context? And can there be regional cooperation to promote or facilitate that? Ajay?
Thank you for this question. I'll just I'll answer it in two parts. The first one is the very quick on the. I want to just add on to what the ambassador just said. I think there is we need technology, but we need more technology to make sure that there is better governance. That different departments, different ministries in different countries, they work together. State governments and central governments are able to communicate with each other their information and programs. So coming to your question about use of technology between public-private partnerships, I think there is a huge potential. A lot of data is being collected, but at the same time, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I want to put this point forward, not just for India, but for other countries. That data that's being collected from producers, from farmers, because of so many new technologies being there. If the government is to share that data with the private sector and monetize data that has been given in good faith, I think that is daylight robbery. I think, yes, there is scope for technology, there's scope for data to be shared, but we need to have institutions to ensure that data is not misutilized. And in the long run, that data does not allow for oligarchies to be created to suppress farm gate prices. And this is something that needs to be flagged now. I think so at WTO also, it needs to be flagged in our part of the world, that we should not come to a point where technology initially seems to be very good for development, but in the long run, we need to have better institutions to ensure that technology and data is not monopolized to suppress livelihoods and prosperity. I understand it's not very positive an answer, but it's more realistic, it's more grounded, and these are the fears that we have. Technology is many a times overrated. It's overrated in the short run. It's only in the longer term we realize that technology may not be as good as we thought it was. Look at what fossil fuels have done and led to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My next question would be for Famida from Bangladesh. There is a question from audience for you. This is about Bangladesh implements price support for rice farmers. How effective is this policy in protecting farmers' interest, especially during the pandemic? Famida, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would say that the government of Bangladesh has been consistently supporting the agriculture sector. That is one of the successes of the government, and there is a continuity of support to the agriculture sector and the farmers. So that I think also that the farmers have been able to take advantage of that and utilize that. So that is why they could deliver, they could produce, and it's doing quite well in terms of having the outcome of this support. So I would congratulate the government as well as the farmers themselves, who have been very, very effective, very agile, resilient to whatever situation had been in terms of external shocks, climate shocks, and also COVID shocks.
Thank you so much. Next question I have is, will go to Ambassador Silva. This is also related to the management of pandemic, the way Sri Lanka has done. Sri Lanka has been successful in managing the pandemic. It was a success story globally. So, but there are also colleagues who are looking into it more carefully in terms of the survey work, and they argue that actually what Sri Lankan government did undermined the market's power, a lot more control. How do you say that if that is the perspective coming up now, and then you have this success in managing the pandemic, how do we explain that to the audience in our region in the context of dealing with pandemic consequences in the coming months and years?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I think Sri Lanka adopted a very community-friendly approach towards curtailing the pandemic, the spread of the pandemic. I think the contact tracing and that was very robust and proven to be successful. And also we used our inbuilt the facilities in the health sector, and we had a very good network of public health officials, and they helped, and even the armed forces came in to rescue in areas of where there were gaps. I think when it comes to distribution of food and commodities, particularly during the pandemic, that was one of the issues that where the private sector failed because of lockdowns and other measures. So the government had to intervene. I think the government intervention was quite appreciated by the communities, and I think even in the fisheries sector, I think one good thing about the fisheries sector is we allowed them to engage in fishery activities, because they have restrictions in conducting fishing activities only up to EEZ because they had to return within a day. And so I think even the government intervened and undertook the distribution channels. Now, that is where the market dominance became somewhat an very attractive feature for the government, because the private sector failed. And when there are, otherwise, how do you ensure the farmer gets a good income? I think that shows that WTO rules sometimes cannot be applied in situations like that. And we should be prepared with such measures, government interventions in times of pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. We know we advocate market-friendly policies, but we also know market is not a panacea. Invisible hands on markets often don't work, and then interventions are needed. But yet, there are a lot of conversation around the way our region is providing subsidies. It cannot be financially sustainable. Famida just pointed out that Bangladesh did a good job in terms of managing the price volatility and supporting the farmers. But if you look at the numbers, I mean, subsidy bills are rising quite significantly in our region as well. So how do we balance that? How do we find that our subsidies, not just in terms of the political consequences and the developed country context, in our context, how do we rationalize those agricultural subsidies given the financial constraint and improve the livelihood? This is what Professor Abhijit does. I know this is a sensitive topic, but you are the right person to respond to it.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Just to provide a bit of a context, the per farmer subsidy in United States is close to $60,000 per year. In South Asian countries, I would dare say it will be around $200 to $300 per year. So if South Asian countries have to survive, this gap needs to come down. We cannot enhance our subsidies. What is relevant is, can we get the developed world to bring down their subsidies? So that should be the first response from my side. That should be the first step forward. And within the South Asian countries, yes, we need to prop up, we need to support our public stockholding programs. I really do not see any substitute for that in the near future. Those will be resource intensive, but as we have seen in India during the pandemic phase, it was this public stockholding program which really prevented millions of Indians who were already at the margin of existence sliding into, I would say, hunger and real malnutrition. It was these food stocks which prevented them from really leading a starvation existence. So I think the effort has to be geared towards making sure that purchasing power is provided. And one way of providing purchasing power is through these public stockholding programs. So short answer is yes, purse strings are tight, pockets are not deep, but there is no escape from the government's responsibility for making sure that public stockholding programs survive and remain vibrant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time, but it has been extremely useful conversation. My last question will go to Madam Aisha Moriani. That actually came from our audience. Actually, most of the questions came from our audience. Thank you very much for submitting your questions. So the question, this one is coming, question is, how are food and economic issues affecting the health of the population in general in the region? If you could share your perspective in the context of Pakistan. The point is very simple. The point the audience is making is, if the families producing the food for the nation having financial difficulties, this is counterproductive situation. So our farmers who are producing food for the entire nation will be suffering from the health consequences. So if you could reflect your thoughts on that, Madam Moriani.
Yes, thank you. Farming community is very important part of Pakistan, and they constitute 20% of the GDP of Pakistan, and our major crops are contributing a lot to the economy. Cotton, which is one of the primary crops, is the backbone of Pakistan's textile industry. And similarly, rice, wheat are very important for food security. But 50% of the agriculture is actually coming from the livestock as well. So dairy and livestock is also very important. Similarly, the minor crops, such as fruits and vegetable. But Pakistan remains a net food importing developing country because we import a lot of our food. And with the climate change and, the water stress situations, I personally think that we may have to import more. So the focus of government policy is to ensure that our agriculture becomes sustainable and we prepare ourselves for drought-like situations, and we are trying to invest on research and development and trying to integrate with the global research system to foresee and connect the farmers with these future challenges by ensuring that a right kind of policy advice is available to the farmers. In the rural areas, because of the COVID, obviously, health issue has become very important, but fortunately, Pakistan, though facing this challenge, but our health ministry and the health infrastructure has worked very efficiently. And by the grace of God, we have been able to handle this situation in a much better way as compared to other countries. And awareness, I think, is extremely important. Adopting, sanitation and giving a lot of importance to SOPs under COVID conditions is something which government has been trying to ensure, and there are massive awareness campaigns for this. And mainly our agriculture right now is affected a lot because of the climate change. So this is a very serious issue for us. And foods at the federal level, we used to have an agriculture ministry, but now it is called Food Security Ministry. And the agriculture itself is with the provinces. So at the federal level, food security is extremely important. And the policy ensures that sustainability and profitability is there, so that at least we continue to produce for our own population. But we know that keeping in view the challenges, we will continue to import. One of the challenges to understand one's limitations within the sustainability dynamic, and try to ensure that international markets remain and food is available and affordable for everyone, so that if countries like Pakistan want to import, they should be able to import. But at the same time, subsidies have to be disciplined so that the imported food should not displace our farmers, whose profitability and sustainability is also very important.
Thank you, Madam Moriani. That brings us to a very exciting close of the last part of the program. It has been really, really exciting. And the last part of this program is basically sharing your last thoughts on the issues. Each of you will have 30 seconds to share your thoughts. But given Madam Moriani did not get the first question, I'd like to start with you, Madam Moriani. 1 minute to share your last thoughts with our audience. Thank you.
Yeah, my thoughts are that I think IFPRI is a very good forum, which poses these type of issues, which have domestic, regional, and international implications. So we have MC12 coming up, and hopefully agriculture will remain a live issue. And some of the important topics raised here will reach to that level, and probably we would be able to develop some disciplines on domestic support, which I think is important for this region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you for the compliments to IFPRI. I'm sure my colleagues at IFPRI, as well as the IISD co-organizers, is taking note and take it forward. IFPRI's job is to produce global public goods in terms of information, and that's what we try to do at IFPRI. Thank you so much for the compliments. Let me also make this note at this point that this program is supported by a CGIAR-wide program we call the Consortium Research Program, Policies, Institutions, and Markets. They have supported it not only here, in other sub-region level. We are very grateful for their support. Next, I would like to invite Madam Ambassador Gautima.
Yes, thank you again for the organizers for this very useful opportunity for me to share my views as a trade negotiator. I think we should have similar events in the future as well, leading up to MC12. Now, of course, MC12 most probably will be extended till end of next year. I think because the pandemic is posing a lot of unprecedented challenges to all of us in organizing this event. Now, when it comes to a negotiator's point of view, I think the agriculture is, as many said, is the key for a failure or a successness. And of course, fishery, now we have an added agenda where we are supposed to conclude the negotiations by the end of this year, but we are not able to do because we cannot commence substantive discussions in this format, the virtual format. And when it comes to agriculture, as I mentioned, the SSM and PSH are the important aspect. Now, from Sri Lanka's point of view, without SSM, I don't think Sri Lanka is able to really accept a package under the agriculture file. And I think the PSH, again, proven to be a very useful tool during the pandemic. That's where the farmers, I think the rice farmers were able to get a better price through the government intervention, and which we normally do not do that. But at times of pandemic, I think it became and even the fisheries sector was benefited out of those interventions. The agriculture subsidies, I think is the key for agriculture's improvement in our countries. The responsible investment in agriculture. The FAO has a lot of code of conduct where we can really learn.
Thank you, madam.
Yeah, thank you.
You're running really late. Thank you so much. Next, may I invite Professor Das for last minute thought.
Compliments to the organizers for this wonderful event. The last message from my side is that the agreement on agriculture is riddled with lots of deficiencies and imbalances which work against the interest of developing countries. So the negotiations, particularly at MC12, must have a clear roadmap to address these issues. In particular, maybe the starting point could be where we had left the Doha round in 2008. That text should be used to carry the negotiations forward, and keeping in mind the huge asymmetries in the per farmer subsidy in the developed countries and those in the developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, may I invite Mr. Jakar. Ajay?
Mr. Jaka has left.
Okay, sorry. So last we have is then Dr. Fahmida Khatun.
I would also like to join others to thank IFRI and the other co-organizers. People have talked about, our experts have talked about the MC12, but given the situation of the Doha round negotiation for the last several years, I don't know how much optimistic I should be. But even then, a multilateral trading system is the last resort probably, because we are observing many FTAs have been discussed, and also regional comprehensive economic partnerships are coming up. But for smaller countries, for the less powerful countries, it is always to deal in a multilateral system. So that's what I'm looking forward to, that the MC12 will resolve a number of issues, including the agricultural trade.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fahmida Khatun. With that, we come to the end of this very exciting session. I thoroughly enjoyed being with you, listening to you, and my colleagues, I'm sure, have been watching, colleagues from IFRI as well as from the ISD, and they have taken notes. We'll remain engaged. Let's remain engaged and see what we can contribute to this important cause. With that, we come to the end of it. Thank you so much once again.